Well, we're now starting broadcast live once again. Uh, uh, it's been a while. I said it was going to be August 11th when we came back, but it ended up being today, August 20th. Ended up being the day we came back. So there have been a lot of sort of, if you will, technical issues that kind of played into why we're coming back as late as we're coming back. So that's about it. There's not much more that I can say about that, other than it does take a while for these projects to get off the ground, and a lot of times we run into a lot of technical difficulties. This is one of the biggest problems, is that I have been having a lot of technical difficulties. Let me just sort of get myself situated here. I've been having a lot of technical difficulties, particularly with the move to 14.4 from 13.10. As I got back, I expected just to come into 13.10, and we would have our easy transition to CyborgAlphaTV Live, but that's not the case. When I got back, there was a notification that I had to upgrade to 14.4. I did that and didn't realize that there were so many problems with the number of problems that there were with 14.4. So that delayed everything until just about now. I just got everything sort of back and working together just yesterday. So that's why I pushed everything off until the 20th. So where are we going from here? Let me just invite people to all this here. Let's say to my circles here. Okay. So I can invite to the public. So let's just do that for now. Okay. So the invitations have been sent out. I've let people know where I am, that we're on live now. Let's hopefully that I don't know if someone was going to show up or not. But anyway, it's 11 o'clock. So let's get on with our topics for today. What we're going to be doing, these are live essays. This is TalkLive on CyborgAlphaTV-Network. We are going to be going live sometime within the next few weeks, and so where this comes in, this is basically these are live essays based on my Insta-vlog notes, and these will eventually lead to what you call it, to the first rough draft, the first cut of a documentary, and then all the way through to the final cut. So in other words, rather than seeing just the final documentary of a presentation, you get or some degree of research, you get to see everything all the way through. So this is actually research as it's going on. It's not sort of hidden behind the scenes type of things in terms of hiding information from you people. This is full-on research. It's going to take me a while to get back into the flow of things. When I first started off, it was a little rough. I'm back starting again. Today is going to be a little rough. So today is primarily going to be an introduction as to what's going to happen. And basically the way it's going to work is that I'm going to be producing 3 essays. And these essays are going to essentially be about 45 minutes in length. The essays are going to be formed as I'm speaking right now. So these are essays that are evolving. Typically, the first 15 minutes are going to be reviews, information that I have to bring in that's relevant to what's going on the TV channel. That will be up to the first 15 minutes, and then after that, we get into more of the actual essay itself. So the first draft of this essay is going to be here on YouTube from 11 till about midnight, and then the second draft is going to be on YouNow, which takes you from midnight to 1 o'clock in the morning. From 1 o'clock in the morning till 2 o'clock in the morning, we're going to be on Twitcast. and that will be the third and final draft of the essay. So, and I'll also take questions and answers. I do have a question that from one of my Indian followers. He's in India. He looks at my research, and he was asking about whether or not I believe in aliens and whether or not my research is going to look into things like SETI and stuff like that. And SETI is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And my answer I have is kind of is sort of it's not, for me. It's not an issue whether I believe in aliens or not. It's whether or not there is sufficient evidence for what we term as aliens, extraterrestrial ETs. Well, is there enough evidence for that? And right now, from what I've seen, there's not enough evidence to suggest that we've been visited or we're being visited. Most of what is occurring in terms of the sightings are occurring around restricted military bases. We know that the military is performing a lot of different experiments. We know, and this is actually what we're going into in our topic here in Atheism and Atomic Bomb, is we're going to get into a lot of these areas here. Why is there such a culture that believes in aliens? What's going on that we have this belief here? And I'll show you that it's actually the way society's been constructed, that we have in many ways been taught to believe in aliens. And this is done very conveniently for us by the government so that we can sort of they can hide military matters in plain sight. In other words, they want to develop something for the military. They don't want to be bothered answering a lot of questions. They can dress it up as aliens and sort of put the information out that way. And so this is what we'll see here is that we'll talk more about that, and this we're talk more about the evidence for aliens, the evidence for extraterrestrial intelligence, and we'll see that the evidence really isn't there. That there, in terms of while there is a possibility in terms of the statement, there must be more out there. There must be somebody else out there beyond us. But at this point in time, we haven't really found anything. So, and I think this is so. The argument for extraterrestrial intelligence is conjecture still. It's still, well, there has to be something more, and that's as far as it goes. And for myself, I'm not particularly worried about things until I actually have some solid evidence that this is the case. And I do have some ideas about how to go about getting some of this bit of evidence, but again, that's research that's going to go on down the road. So that being the case, and say the research on down the road, this is actually part of a research project. This is part of my media lab, and I'm building the entire project. CyborgAlphaTV and CyborgAlphaTV Live is being built on open source on Linux, and so what you're going to see is a part of this evolution. You're going to see the growth of the research. You're going to see the development. You're going to see, and because it's CyborgAlphaTV Live, just like CyborgAlphaTV, I'm not going to cut out the mistakes. Part of a research book, and part of a good research tool and a good research book, and I try to explain this many times to help sites that want to be a good resource tool. If you want to be a good resource tool, yes, people are going to be making mistakes. They could do spelling mistakes. They could do a whole bunch of different things. But in science, you don't erase the mistakes. You simply note that the mistakes are there, and that's how you deal with mistakes. You leave them so that other people can see the mistakes, so they can see what may be wrong and what may be right. So what happens? You don't replace and delete the mistake. What you do is you rewrite it in such a way that it as a notation, as a second notation. So you'll have the original there. Then you have a rewrite of the original that is the more correct version. And that's actually how you deal with errors and mistakes within science, within research, so that you can see where the mistakes were, where things may have been phrased right, or it could have been phrased better, or there was a mistake in some of the ideas, some of the things that you're putting forward, and you'll also see where you have differences in opinions. So that's kind of how you approach these things. But again, some of these mod groups that are heavily modded don't understand this, and they go all about trying to delete the mistakes or what they view as mistakes. But in their attempt to do so, what ends up happening is instead of simply deleting the mistake, they end up deleting a lot of information, the important information that should have been there if it was a good research tool. And that's why here, yeah, I make mistakes. Yeah, I don't always look as professional as I could look. But this is about the raw research environment. It's not about being polished. It's not about looking like, a quintessential professor. It's about the raw research. It's about the exploration, and that being the case, because it is part of my research notes, part of my research environment, all the mistakes need to be included. You can't delete the stuff. You shouldn't delete the stuff. It needs to be there for the viewer to see this. And the thing is, because we're talking about stuff in history, we're going back to the origins of the atomic bomb. We're going back to the origins of the beginning of what we call modern society, which is about 1900. It's about from the Victorian period on. We really have the evolution of modern society, modern man. It comes from the Victorian period on. This is where we're going to go back into. But we not only have to go back into history, but we're dealing from a perspective of anthropology and a perspective of archaeology. So in other words, we're going to be answering these questions in many ways, and our analysis of the whole called the essay series. It's called Atheism and the Atomic Bomb. We're not going to be doing much about religion. Most of the stuff is going to be research. It's going to be pure research. And this doesn't necessarily mean you're going to agree with everything. Researchers can do a lot of research, and you may agree with it or disagree with it. That's fine. There's not an issue. I'm not here to convince you what I'm doing is right. I'm simply here to present the research as the research is going along. If you are interested in following this further, this is aimed at a second-year level university and above. That means you're not going to find a lot of stuff I'm talking about in textbooks. You'll have to go out to find other sources. In terms of the sources that I use, I don't give a bibliography or give sources because I don't get my information from one source. I'll look at maybe 30 or 40 different sources before I write a particular note down. And what happens is I'll write ad hoc notes down as I'm looking at a particular source, and there'll be an ad hoc note here or there. And it's not the full notes, in terms of a full ad hoc note, doesn't exist until I've gone through 20, 30, 40 different sources. So it's what I understand when I'm presenting in my notes is an amalgamation of maybe 30 or 40 different sources. So there's no way I can say this is the source that I went to get this particular bit of information. And I think this is what you need to do. As a researcher, you can't look at one source. You need to find as many sources as possible, and then you take an amalgamation. You take a consensus of the 30 or 40 sources, and you boil that down into what your notes are going to be and what you're going to be sort of talking about. And this is how you proceed through I proceed through with my notes. And I am where I am, not because of that I'm a genius or I'm at a particular level that nobody else is at. It's simply because I've had this experience. This is what I've been doing now for 25 years. I spent 5 years building my library and then 20 years inside the actual research, going from the library outwards. And my whole point where I was looking at this, I was looking at the quantum physics principle of the random walk. And this was my test of the random walk. And 25 years later, I can say that the random walk does work, that there are some very valid points to the random walk. And the thing is that if you watch the vlog series that I have called the BTS vlog, you'll see that I have no idea from day to day what's going to end up happening. There are days that are missing. There are days that work out well. There are days that work, you know, there are a lot of unknowns in my life on a day-to-day basis. And if you're the type of person that enjoys this level of unknown, enjoys the what I call the excitement of this type of research, then this is the type of field for you. But if you're not into this type of stuff, if sitting at a lecture day, like tonight at 11 o'clock, instead of watching a regular TV show, you're watching a lecture here like this, if that's your idea of fun and you like this, then, you know, great. So let's get on with the series. It's now 15:15. I'm not going to know whether someone chimes in or not in terms of watching, because I'm looking at my notes right now. So let's get started. I'm working on the series. It's called Atheism and the Atomic Bomb. Excuse me. And what happens here is atheism is not something that's brand new. It actually emerged in the 1800s, around the Victorian period, or actually a little bit before that. There's actually a whole history to atheism, but we're not going to get into that exactly just yet. Right now, we're simply doing the introduction, so we're going to go over a lot of things. One thing that needs to be said is that rather than doing this every single day, we'll be working now on Fridays. So basically, I'll be back again on Friday for the next part of this lecture. So we'll be back on Friday for another essay. So where do we go from here? As I said, atheism is not something that's new. It emerged in the 1800s. In many ways, it's atheism, but it has its roots earlier, and we will at some point in time be exploring the roots of atheism, but it falls back into philosophy and the origin of Western philosophy. And ironically enough, the origins of Western philosophy, even though it was supposed to be secular, emerged from the Roman Catholic Church. In other words, the origins of atheism is not secular in its origin. It's actually theistic in its origins. And this is where we have to get into terms of understanding that theism is not simply believing in God. Theism is simply the philosophy about God. And this includes, let's say your philosophy is about that there is no God. That's also theism, because you're taking the antithesis, you're taking the antithesis position that there is no God. So the thesis that you have, or the idea that you have, that God exists and how God exists and our relationship with God, that would be a standard theism. The atheism would be the without. And even though atheism is without God, because it discusses God and the concept of God and whether God exists or not, it's still within the category of theism. So this is where our definition comes in, and this is an important one to remember, and I will be sort of bringing this up again every so often, because I don't want to cast the impression that I'm simply talking about religion. Again, theism is not religion. Theism leads to religion. Religion sits on top of theism. Religion is, by definition, the practice of a particular theology or understanding of God. And your practices sort of, in many ways, denote how you believe in God. So in other words, it's the practice of theism is your religion. And as I said before, there are people who they say, well, what religion are you? I say, well, I'm a Christian. Okay, well, let's see if you are a Christian in terms of religion. Religion is the things you do on a ritualistic basis, and that means on a regular basis. You do something, as they say, religiously, on a ritualistic basis. And so let's say Saturday night, if you're Canadian, and for a lot of sports fans, you watch hockey. Then there's also Friday night football. There was football on Monday nights as well. There's Monday night football. If you watch any of these things on a regular basis, that you never missed them, that the house had to be quiet, or you have chips in there. In other words, You have things you do on a regular basis for sports. And you are in that sports mode more often than you are in church, right? Because church is where you are as a Christian. If you are doing sports on a regular basis more often than you are doing church on a regular basis, your religion is not Christianity, but it's the sport you're following on a regular basis. That is your religion. The religion is what you practice more often than not. So if you say you're a Christian, but you don't practice as being a Christian, then you're not a Christian. It's that simple. You are, in terms of your religion, whatever you practice the most. And so this is how we're going to work on these definitions. And because we're talking about practicing in terms of the way we live, this actually has its roots or a application to anthropology. Anthropology is the study of the way we are. We have cultural anthropology, which studies our cultures, our festivals, our art, our music, all those different things. But then you also have other types of anthropology. See, I think cultural anthropology goes even further because the culture that we are permeates more than simply what we call overt or obvious culture. It has more of a subtle impact on our life. It has impacts on what we eat, how we eat. Give an example. Pop culture. Let's call this pop culture. This is what we call standard popular culture. Standard popular culture is going out to eat, particularly at a fast food restaurant like McDonald's, Burger King, there's Chipotle. There's a whole bunch of different fast food restaurants that many people go to on a regular basis. And you'll hear if you watch some of these documentaries on these videos on YouTube. Let's say you're watching a family video and they're going out on a regular basis after baseball. They go out to Chipotle. Well, that's actually a cultural event. That's part of their culture, even though they're not thinking about it as culture. That's part of their culture. So they go from baseball, they go to Chipotle. From gymnastics or from dance, they go to Chipotle. That's part of their ritual. That's part of the culture. And this is what we call pop culture. This is common culture, if you will. You'll see this sort of common culture in a less branded manner. When you look at vlogs from BeautyCon or VidCon, you go look at the beauty gurus as they go to these various different beauty conventions. And what do you see? In more cases than not, the girls are always ordering these large salads, particularly a Caesar salad, and that's their particular meal. And as you see them with Starbucks and a Caesar salad, this is actually part of the culture. You're starting to see a cultural development here, because you're starting to see something that's common in terms of the food and what they eat and how they eat. You're starting to see this as part of this particular group here. It's identified to this particular group. And this is how culture and anthropology actually work together. But as I said, culture is not specific to, let's say, opera or ballet, or what are in many cases are called the higher arts. Anthropology, in many cases, can be generally thought of as looking at the way a society lives on a day-to-day basis. You're looking at the nitty-gritty. You're looking at the details of life, everyday life, in a particular society, in a particular group. Give an example. If you go into the goth culture, and talk about goth culture, you can actually do an anthropology there and actually see that there are not only one type of goth, but you see there are a variety of different types of goth. That you have what called flavors of goth. And these different flavors, these different groupings, all shift around these what we would consider minute changes or minute differences to these particular groupings, and these people in these groups. They're significant. They're not insignificant. And so these are the things that we have to sort of consider. That these are the things we have to sort of understand as anthropologists, as researchers, as this part of the, and then we can apply this back to this whole question of atheism and the atomic bomb, because we can see what happens in everyday life as these cultures develop, as these cultures emerge and evolve. We can see how all the different elements that are in life and have been in life throughout history have influenced the way in which we live. And this includes the atomic bomb, because the atomic bomb was in development from early on. It was in development from about 1900 on. It didn't really begin until until basically World War II, the actual development of the atomic bomb. But it was the theories, the science around it was actually being developed prior to World War II. It started around the 1900s, and then it really started taking off around the 1930s. And a whole society sort of grew up around it. But because the work was top secret, no one really knew about it. But the society itself was actually formed by theory, by philosophy. And that they believe, and these are the two people who believe this, and they have a huge mark on our society. And this is Freud and Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays is Freud's nephew. They have a huge impact on our society because they are at the base of a lot of what we call common society today. Things that we think about today as common, including we call our consumer culture. Because all the consumers, if you look at on all the billboards and see all the signs, look at any downtown. Look at all the commercial signs. Look at Times Square. Look at all the sales signs that are there. And what is this consumer culture? This consumer culture, this mass consumerism, was created by Edward Bernays. And that's actually what he did. His whole application of psychology and anthropology was to move mass markets, to move people in masses as a herd to buy things that they didn't necessarily need to buy. In other words, you need to convince somebody in order to buy something that they absolutely need, even though they may not really need it. And this was the whole impetus behind consumerism and the creation of the consumer consultant, by creating the mindset, creating the psychology, the group psychology, the herd psychology, that when somebody has something, it's better than what you have, and then you therefore have to go out and get that. That's the creation of Edward Bernays. This was the mindset he created, and he taught this to a lot of different students, to a lot of different companies, and this was the creation of mass marketing. The whole concept of marketing grew up around psychological manipulation of the herd, creating this herd mentality that you have to go and buy something. This was Edward Bernays. But the thing is that governments saw this. They understood the power of mass manipulation. And so governments moved to create two societies. They moved to create a government society, and they made then they moved to create actually three societies. The public government society, that's political society. Then there is the scientific society. This is where all the hidden research is going on. And then there is the public society that is aware of neither the secret science society or what's actually going on in the political society. In other words, they try to create a separation between what they consider to be classes. And they do this by trying to create what we call psychological walls or psychological barriers rather than having physical barriers. And this can actually be seen in archaeology. We can actually go into archaeology and see how this actually evolved in history, in terms of human history. And the thing is, we can actually see this not only in modern history, we can see how this is actually used prior to modern history to show that the concepts of Edward Bernays and Freud were not necessarily new ideas, but a recycling, a rehashing of something that was actually very old and that other institutions had been using. And so what happens is the first thing that we're going to talk about next week, next Friday, we're going to spend a little bit more time in the introduction here. The thing that we're going to get into is psychology. And because psychology is the root of everything. The way we think, the way we behave is the root of everything. Because it determines what we do in life, it determines how we perceive things, it determines what we understand, what we don't understand. And the thing is, the things we don't understand, how does that impact our psychology? How does that change the way we behave? I mean, are we afraid of something? Are we not afraid of something? If we are afraid of something, how does that affect us? And we can take a look at human psychology, individual human psychology. and see how that plays out with the individual. But they also can look at how psychology can actually manifest itself in a group, and how psychology of the individual, in many cases, will either shape or conform to that of a particular group. Because in many cases, people want to conform. They want to be part of a group. They want to have friends. They want to be part of, we'll call it, society. And as these pressures to be part of society exist, we conform and change our behaviors to match these particular groups or societies that we want to be in. And we could demonstrate that this actually has been going on for a long time, that this sort of grouping in societies, the creation of groups in societies, has been something that's been going on for a long time. And it's actually been used by a variety of different groups to manipulate and control crowds of people, but even on a political scale. When you want to control a group of people, you want to rule a particular people, well, how do you make these people submit to your rule? How do you get them to understand that you are the law, you set the standards, you are the number one? And the thing is, you got to change your psychology in such a way that everybody within the group understands and accepts, not only understands, but accepts that you are in charge. You got to make those who want to be rebellious that they can't rebel because you're too powerful, and then if they rebel, that terrible things will happen to them. So in other words, you create these boundaries, you create the psychology that you are the leader, that you are number one, that you are all powerful. And in many cases, the way this was done was to have a God created that would ordain leaders as our leaders. In other words, you're not a leader simply because, yeah, I took the position, that was it, and now from now on you're going to call me leader. No. The way it has to work out is that the way you get people on average to believe that you are the leader is say, well, it wasn't my idea to become a leader. God chose me to become a leader, and because God chose me to become a leader, I've been ordained by God, and, well, this is my job, and this is what I have to do. And it goes over a lot easier that way than as if you say, well, I'm the leader, and that's just about it. And what happens, we're using, and this is what you can show is that religion, and this is where you have this argument about religion and how bad religion is. And you have the creation of religion from theism. In many cases in history, this is not all cases, but in many cases in history, to create a leadership, to create a society in which the leader is ordained and created by God, placed there by God, and then therefore cannot be challenged. The example of this is the Pope. And the Pope, still, you know, if you want to say this is all old history, this is old mythology, well, look at the Pope. Look at the popularity of the Pope today. Go to any place that the Pope visits. How many people show up? Look at the crowds that show up. And that tells you the number of people who still believe in the Pope. And this is not talking about believing in God. This is talking about believing in the Pope. And there are a lot of people up there, regardless of their belief in God himself, or itself, or however you want to describe it, regardless of their belief in Jesus, they believe absolutely in the Pope. In other words, for them, the thing that matters most is the papacy, is the Pope. And it's this Pope, this symbol of the Roman Catholic Church, this is, for them, their religion. That's what they believe in. And this is exactly what I'm talking about in terms of psychological manipulation. If you can convince somebody and get them to believe that you are from God, that God puts you where you are, then as they believe this, your position is absolute, because you are, as this leader ordained by God, next to God. And this is what gives the papacy its power. And you can see the history of the papacy and its power throughout history. Basically from about 1000 AD on, you can see the evolution of the papacy. You can see its wars, you can see its armies, you can see its military, you can see its secret agents, its so-called intelligence. I mean, if you think the CIA is brand new, that somebody, this is something created by modern society, guess again. The Jesuits, which are part of the Roman Catholic Church, if you're a Roman Catholic, you know about the Jesuits. Well, the Jesuits are the intelligence service of the papacy. That's exactly what they are. They were created to determine what the truth was, and to sort of function in many ways exactly like the intelligence service, the services that we see today for most militaries. Because the papacy did have military. You had fighting monks. That's what the Templars were. That's what the Hospitallers were. And if you understand what the Templars and Hospitallers were, then you know what the Masons are, and you know what the Illuminati are, and because these are all interconnected religious societies, you now begin to understand that because these societies are still around with us today, they're in our banking, they're in our universities, they're in our government. The U.S. dollar is not a secular symbol. On the back of the U.S. dollar is the pyramid with the all-seeing eye. That is a Templar. That is a Masonic symbol. It is not something that's secular. These are part of these theistic societies, these religious societies. And again, theism is not specifically defined. They define it however they want to define it. So we're not using theism and theistic as a specific definition of God, but just a general that these groups have a definition of God. And what that definition is at this particular point in time is irrelevant, because we will get into some of the more nitty-gritty details later on, but at this point in the introduction, there's no need to do this. We don't need to get into the specifics of it. If you understand this, you can now understand how we evolved from Tesla and the war machine and into this particular concept of atheism and the atomic bomb. Because what happens here is, as much as we hear about atheism and that there is no God and that science is the end-all and be-all, if you actually go in and take a look at what actually happened within the history of science, and this means you actually understand what happened to Tesla, then you often come into the concepts of the Illuminati, you come into the whole concept of conspiracy theory, and about these various different societies. We call it secret societies. Go into this history of this stuff, again, further, to dissect this, you'll run into the Jesuits, you'll run into the Templars, you'll run into the Hospitallers, you'll run into the Masons, and you'll run into a variety of these groups that have existed in history, that actually existed in history, still active, but in a different face today. In other words, it's the same group, but the face has changed. So the facade is different, but once you understand and pick up the underneath, what's underneath has been there throughout history. So this is where it calls up. If we were indeed a secular society, and that this is the way things are, then we would not expect to see that in these particular places of science we should not see theists. But yet, the majority of people you see in science, and this is true for the atomic bomb, are theists. They believed in God, or a God. Just put it this way, they believed in a God. They had a sense of theism. Even though the definitions of their theism, right, how their theism is specifically defined, differs from person to person, the fundamentals that they are a theist is there. So when you ask yourself, well, how many people are actually theists of these particular peoples who shape science, and you'll find that a minority of the people are atheists. And you don't really see the atheists particularly much up on the top levels. I mean, Einstein was a theist. Niels Bohr was a theist. Most of the people who were there, Planck was a theist. Most of the people there had some degree of belief in God, or a God. And so when this becomes your understanding, your observation in history, and this means you do have to do some archaeological work. Because if you're going not from a textbook. We're not doing this from a textbook. We're trying to understand what actually happened in history. This means you have to start doing some detective work, and this is archaeological work. Archaeological work puts together the pieces of people's lives as they lived it throughout history. From there, you can they go from the archaeology to the anthropology to see, well, why do these people live with this particular thing that you found in history? Well, how do they use it? You also have literature you can go to read. This is also finding it. It's also archaeology. Reading any author's work, you get a sense of who they were. You get a sense of the environment they were in. Because most authors in history wrote from their own personal experiences. They didn't make things out of thin air. Give an example. Mary Beth Shelley. She wrote one of the best-selling books, known as Frankenstein. I mean, her work today, Frankenstein, is so influential in today's culture. If you look at the dolls today, known as what are they called again? Oh yeah, it's a replacement of Barbie. They have something called Mattel has something called Monster High. Well, what's this based on? This is all based on Dracula. It's based on Frankenstein. And based on the Wolfman. This is the stuff that came out of Victorian culture. In other words, you're having a rehashing of Victorian culture. Well, what was in this culture that, particularly with the book with Frankenstein, was this all pure fiction, or was this something more to it? And as you begin to research the work of Mary Shelley, you begin to find out who she was, where she lived, how she lived, and you go through the history of that particular period, that particular time. What you'll find out is that everything she writes about in Frankenstein was actually going on at the time. There were dissections of human bodies at the time. They were learning how to dissect the human body. A lot of the early medicine came out of that particular period that Frankenstein was written in. And because they weren't allowed to get bodies, these university professors, these researchers weren't allowed to get bodies, and these researchers were all barons. They were all very wealthy. You couldn't get into a school, a university, unless you were very wealthy and had a lot of money to pay. Education was for something, it was basically for rich people when they had nothing to do. If you were rich, you had a lot of money, you had nothing to do all day long. Well, university was one way to fill your time. And this is why the universities had the clubs, this is why they had the frats, they had societies. It was basically an all-boys club. It was a way to go hang out, have fun, and so on and so forth. And because this is the way it was, and there were geeks back then, just the way there are geeks now, the geeks who liked science got around and started building their own labs. The thing is you couldn't dissect the human body. They were dissecting animals, they were dissecting other things like that, but, before that. But they weren't happy doing simply dissecting animals. They wanted now, after they were dissecting animals, they wanted to start dissecting human beings. But you couldn't do that. That was against the law. So they would pay people on a lower level, they would pay people to go out and rob graves. So someone would recently die. You would see the body be dug fresh. They'd pay the grave digger to go out, dig up the body, and bring the body back into your lab. And that way, you can experiment on the dead human body. You can do the dissection. You can do a lot of the things that, in many cases, would be considered illegal today. In other words, you cannot today set up your own dissection lab. You cannot dissect a human body in your basement. And this is exactly what they did. A lot of the stuff that they did back then, what they call science, was considered highly illegal. It started the rumors that you had about people going into the graves, robbing the graves, people creating monsters. This was the whole story of Frankenstein. So the whole story of Frankenstein was something that was real, something that you can actually go back and you can do research. You can actually do research on Frankenstein to see the reality of what was going on. And I've done a bare minimum amount of research. I did sort of glossed over this. There's a lot more to do. That research does not end easily. Every time you get to a point in research, you answer a few questions, but there's always questions beyond it. So as I said, I've done a large chunk of the research, not a large chunk, but a good amount of research into Frankenstein. I know that Frankenstein was based on on what was actually going on at the time. I know from my initial research that there was a Victor Frankenstein around that particular time. I don't know if his name is Victor, but I know there was a Frankenstein at that time. There is a lineage of people called with the last name Frankenstein. I know there's a town actually in Germany called Frankenstein. So there's a lot there to research. So I've got a lot of good answers, but there's a lot more still to go on. There's a lot more to sort of understand. And you can take these sort of the parallel research that you're doing, and I am doing this research. You can take this research and parallel it to the work that we're going to do now, looking at how the ideas and the understandings of our society today emerged and evolved. And then you can understand, like, if you understand that Germany was the center where they were doing a lot of these dissections, that they were looking into the mechanisms of human being, the mechanisms of the body. And they found two mechanisms. And you'll see at the time you go back into the history, you'll see there's two types of mechanisms that they're talking about. They're talking about tinctures. They're talking about these labs where you're mixing large amounts of beakers, and they have the formula that gives the elixir for life. That's the basis of chemical man. That man is a chemical body, a chemical being, and that we exist as a series of chemical formulas. Find the right chemical formula, and you can extend life forever. There is a second group of people who saw the electrical impulses of man, who saw the electricity in man, and believed that man was electric, that the essentials to life was electricity. And this was sort of, you'll see this as lightning bolts on the necks of Frankenstein. You had the formulas and everything, but Frankenstein had to sort of crank this the monster up to the ceiling where he'd be exposed to lightning bolts. You have the electricity forming around the guy. You bring the bad guy back down. After we've gotten this electricity, what happens? He's alive now. And the thing is that this is the two types of men that came out, the two types of men that came out in the 1800s, called chemical man and electric man. These concepts gave way to our drug companies, the pharmaceuticals. And you actually saw the chemical use and the electric use in the formation of psychiatry, where they shocked people to resolve problems, and they also they called electroshock therapy. And then you also use chemicals like LSD to treat problems within human behavior. In other words, you had a chemical man and you had an electrical man. For chemical man, you would use chemistry. You would give them an elixir to make their minds better. For electric man, you would use electricity to resolve these particular problems. And you had a dichotomy between these two different groups of researchers. And the history and the evolution of psychiatry from psychology is quite an interesting one, because you see how both the psychologist and the psychiatrist actually intertwined and intermingled within society. So they weren't sort of isolated from each other. They were kind of interconnected. And the thing is, because things in history are not isolated, you can then move forward into genetics and eugenics, the concept that we have, and this is now more than simply concept, that man has genes, that we are genetically derived, that we. And this is not. Here's where the view was, and it's been for this for a long time, not just recently. We recently discovered DNA. We recently have been discovered how to work with DNA. But it's been for a long time that we believe that DNA, that there was a chemical structure that was responsible for heredity, that we behave the way we behave because of some degree of chemical structure that was passed on from parent to child. And this is the view of eugenics. This is the view of genetics. And this view that defectives, people who behave badly in society, were defective, that there was a chemical malfunction in them. And then the only way to correct this chemical malfunction was not really to correct it, but these people had to be deleted. The defectives in society, in order to prevent the propagation of these genes, had to be eliminated from society. In other words, These people were cancer. In order to get rid of the cancer, you had to amputate. And this is where they came up with the concept of euthanasia, that certain segments of society, in order for the benefit of society to progress, because these people were progressives, in order for society to progress, that the defectives had to be gotten rid of. And this was the origins of the death camps. The Nazi death camps were these eugenic factories working to cleanse society of the defectives so that the benefits of regular society could grow. And so what happens is that you begin to see now how history forms connections between events that we didn't necessarily know about. And this is sort of what happens here, is we can use these understandings to evolve our understanding of how our society grew, how our society emerged, and where we might be possibly going from here on out. So anyways, I am going to try to come back Friday night. I think Friday night will be our next lecture night, where we will continue on this line. We'll go further into this. I will give another essay. We'll get further into this because the next essay in about 10 minutes is going to be on you now. It's going to be a second write of this. It's going to be a second version of this, and sort of a second draft. But Friday is going to be our next lecture. I don't think we can do this on a daily basis. I think I was looking at it before. There's too much research that has to go into this to do this on a daily basis, and I'm not ready yet to do this on a daily basis. So right now it's going to be on Friday. We'll try this on Wednesday nights and Friday nights will be our lecture nights. And if things go well for the next few weeks on Wednesday nights and Friday nights, we'll see if we can add a few more days into this, and we'll go from there. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, don't forget, leave them down below. If you have comments, leave them down below, and I will answer any comments that I get. And this is what I told people before, and people were surprised. Then I will answer your questions in the video. In the next video, any comments or questions that I see down below in the comment there, I'll answer. I'll answer them live in the video. So, and I will acknowledge that you made the comments. So. I thank you for watching this broadcast. I hope to be doing more of this. So it went well so far. We're on 14.4. Kubuntu 14.4 worked relatively well for this particular exercise, or particular essay today. And I will see you Friday night. All right. Take it easy. Goodbye. I'm Dr. Daniel Karras. This is Talk Live on Cyborg Alpha TV.